Welcome to the StressOut Project podcast, where we explore strategies for managing workplace stress and professional burnout. We are super excited with launching the series with this first episode of ours, which is dedicated to understanding what stress and professional burnout are. Here with us is our first guest in the series, Mr. Krasimir Markov, who is a PhD engineer, a consultant in the automotive industry, and a member of the Transport Sector Skills Council at the Ministry of Education and Science of Bulgaria. Dr. Markov is also a lecturer at the Kanchev University of Ruse. And today we will talk about the relationship between stress, work, and employee performance at the workplace. Dr. Markov, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for the invitation. It is a pleasure to be your first guest and kickstart this podcast.
Pleasure is all ours. How about we dive right into it? Most people don't realize stress until they experience it. Perhaps you can tell us, what is your understanding of stress?
A lot depends on whether we are talking about stress in personal life or stress at work, as they differ in importance. Stress in personal life affects the quality of life, while stress at work affects the quality of production, of task performance. And I would say that if we talk about workplace stress, it is extremely imperative to be able to move the tasks and therefore meet the deadlines of the goals.
Would you say that stress is actually perhaps beneficial to the workplace?
Well, it depends on the stress levels that are set. About 100 years ago, two psychologists, Robert Yerkes and John Dodson, established the correlation between the performance of easy and difficult tasks and nervous excitability. In 1955, another psychologist, Donald Hebb, worked by removing the performance of easy tasks. And subsequently, about 40 years ago in 1983, Kenneth Welford, a third psychologist, already discovered the ultimate correlation between task performance, such as productivity and stress levels, respectively. Dr. Welford represented this correlation as a curve where he divided this relationship into 4 zones: too little stress, optimal stress, respectively, too much stress, and burnout zone. In this dependency, when we talk about too little stress, the worker is relaxed, they are not engaged in tasks and are inactive. At that point, managers have to increase the stress levels to be able to increase their productivity and get them into the optimal stress levels where productivity is maximum.
Wait, so you're saying we actually need stress and we can even tweak its levels to get more productive? Sounds a bit dangerous. Shouldn't there be any boundaries not to be crossed?
Yes, that is certainly possible. That is why stress management is so important. There's boundary between the optimal levels of stress and too much stress, which is the so-called overload, or in other words, the limit of fatigue. If fatigue appears, it means that the person is experiencing overload or too much stress, usually in the form of exhaustion. And here now we have to say that short-term overloads are, how shall I say, permissible, but on the other hand, it becomes a problem when this is systematic. From a manager's perspective, this means that if they overload an employee for a short term, then they have to be able to unload them to get the employee back to optimal stress levels. If we don't have proper stress management in place and we put more and more tasks on a person, then their stress levels increase significantly and they will eventually run into a wall. Their productivity decreases sharply and they go down into a 4th zone, which is called the burnout zone, which, according to Dr. Welford, starts with 3 indicators: panic, anxiety, and anger. This is one of those situations where you go to somebody and you see that they're already starting to scold you without you having said anything to them. And they seem angry. That's the beginning, and for most, increasing stress leads to what's called a breakdown or a snap, right? So that's why we can say that a lot depends on stress levels, how we control these levels to be able to increase productivity or decrease productivity, that is, to achieve the optimal maximum productivity.
That last thing you said is very interesting about the breakdown. I haven't heard of that. I know about burnout, but is that some sort of subsequent level of burnout or
Burnout is the whole zone. It starts with these three indicators: panic, anxiety, and anger. And if you don't reduce the stress levels at that point, then what you'll end up with is a breakdown top to bottom. In that breakdown, productivity is zero if we look at the chart, whereas maximum productivity is where we have close to the fatigue limit. And here we have to say you can't always get people to work at 100% of their capabilities. This, for example, from my experience in the automotive industry, when we talk about workers, we use these principles when we calculate the capacity of a line or something that has to be produced. Well, we calculate it at 100%. However, we always reduce by 10 to 15% what the workers have to produce, and so we get a productivity of about 80 to 85%. And this is what we can call long-term productivity, simply because humans cannot be robots and always work at 100% of their capabilities. And hence, accordingly, there are days when they will achieve that 100%. There are days when they won't due to personal problems, not feeling well or something else. And so when we plan the workflow like that, the worker doesn't know it. They think that what we have given them a task to complete to 100%, but that task has already been reduced by 10 to 15%. And this is generally a very good practice when we talk about productivity in terms of stress levels, to be able to always be at his maximum productivity.
very interesting take? And how do you actually measure stress?
Stress can be measured, generally speaking, in two ways, either by a psychological test or by a medical test. As psychological tests, the most common are those for stress in personal life. Such tests can be said to be the stress scale and the stress perception scale, developed in 1967 by psychiatrists Thomas Holmes and Richard Ray. And the medical test is the one we do to find out the levels of a hormone called cortisol. The latter one is absolutely definite. The results from such a test show cortisol levels above 60 units. The person is under stress. So if you happen to have to prove you are under stress, that is the way you prove it. The Holmes-Ray stress scale, it is about stress in personal life, and it measures 43 events in a person's life within the last year. Each of these events has a different value in the form of points. For example, a child is born, 39 points, marriage and getting married, 50 points, death of a spouse, 100 points. This is rated as the highest level of stress. The points are between 11 for the lowest event and 100 points for the highest event. The goal is this: when we have already identified the things that happened during the year, we add up the number of points, and accordingly, if the total is below 150, then we have no reason to worry. If it is between 150 and 299 points, these are already medium levels of stress, but at the same time, the score indicates a 50% probability or moderate disease risk. And if it is over 300 points with 80% probability, EI, high disease risk. But again, to say this scale is a personal life stress scale, and it also includes some things related to work. For example, a problem with colleagues. So there we include a total of these 43 events. Whereas in the stress perception scale, the specific is that each person has a different perception of stress. Two people can work on the same task, but one could experience more stress than the other while performing the task. And it usually depends on how well prepared they are. That is, whether he or she is trained to perform that task.
Perhaps if they've experienced stress before, maybe, or
No, if we take the same task, people who are without any stress, so the one who has had the training for that task will be with almost some stress, while the one who has no training will experience more stress. So training is one of the ways that you can reduce stress in the workplace. So this is the case of the scale, given a period of 1 month. Here, respondents have to say what their feelings and thoughts are so that their score can be reported as stress. As there are now 10 questions here, each question has 5 possible answers, from the typical of never, 0 points, to very often, 4 points. Then you add up the points again, and based on the result, you can tell the respective stress levels. The other thing worth mentioning here is that these are, again, to say in personal life, as the stress perception scale can very easily be reworked so that it can be applied to workplace stress. For example, how many times last month did you think about quitting your job? That's one of the questions that can be asked. Or do you have a conflict with someone higher up in the hierarchy? This scale can easily be redesigned to give information about job stress, and it is imperative that it be anonymous. Because if the person has a conflict with a superior, isn't he going to say we can't take his or her opinion into account? The medical option, as I said, is measuring the hormone cortisol. It's typical that it has to be measured in the morning because this hormone is the lowest early in the morning on an empty stomach, and that's absolute proof that the person is under stress, whereas the other two are.
so if we doubt whether we are under stress or burnout, we can do such a test, which is a typical medical test to find out if we are under stress.
Yes, it is blood test. Most often the suspicion comes not from the employee, it comes from their employer. One of the common reasons there are conflicts in the workplace is when someone says, I am stressed, and takes a day off. And if they do a test like that, they could use it to prove they are indeed under stress. Perhaps it is a good time to transition to what are the symptoms of stress. Well, there are 7 of them. The first symptom is irritability, mostly constant irritability, which corresponds to this anger that's in the productivity and stress curve.
As we call it, to get up on the wrong side of the bed.
To some extent, yes, to some extent, no, because the person may indeed have a problem that is not related to workplace stress. Here we are talking mostly about constant irritability. So, like when the person is angry about something for weeks, something is going on with them. And the other second option is when it is combined with the second symptom, which is fatigue, and I mean constant fatigue, which again resonates with this curve. So if we systematically keep the person in a state of overload, they will start to procrastinate little by little. Yeah, maybe not so much at the beginning, but over time this fatigue will build up. Difficult concentration, this is the third symptom, and consequently missing deadlines. And here you have these things: difficulty concentrating on things that are easy to remember, for example, meetings, times, dates of some kind. This is the third symptom. The fourth symptom is forgetfulness, again related to difficult concentration. And here comes the fifth symptom, which is the so-called break point: loss of sleep, sleep problems. If this happens, the person faces 2 scenarios. They either will go to the doctor or something will happen. Sleep problems is one of those symptoms that already tells the person something is wrong. They don't take measures and don't go to the doctor. Physical problems will also start occurring, and this is the sixth symptom, and they can be divided into three groups. Neurological, that is dizziness, pain, muscle cramps. Then we can say breathing problems, like shortness of breath or even in rapid pulse. That is to say palpitations appear. That is to say physical problems already appear, and from there the last groups, which is a very severe case, mental problems and most often depression. But top to bottom, most people go to the doctor on the fifth symptom. Then they say something's wrong, I can't sleep. 1, 2, 4, 5 days, gone, 1 week already. The person says, I'm going to the doctor. And there, the doctor says, you're going 2 weeks off. These are some of the ways that one can measure stress and therefore recognize stress.
All of what you said is very interesting. What can an employer or direct supervisor do to reduce stress in the workplace and help their employees not reach the point of professional burnout or of those points you mentioned?
First and foremost, to be able to recognize stress in their employees, that is, how to recognize them, and first of all, to know what tasks can be assigned to which employee in order not to overload employees with work. There was a manager of a big company, a computer hardware company, who planned his working hours like this: 80% tasks, 20% free time. Those 20% are not actual free time. He sets this time aside for situations like when someone comes in unplanned and interrupts him. So 20% of the time is set aside for contingencies. If we divide 75 by 25, we will have 6 hours of scheduled tasks and 2 hours of unscheduled tasks. This is an example of a proper time management approach, because without this, we cannot talk about stress management in work settings. Symptoms can be detected by simple observation. For example, you notice that one of your employees is late with tasks, is constantly angry, or they are late for work. After this initial observation, you can now talk about a dialogue. You can go talk to him. You have been coming late to work lately. How are you? Is everything okay with you? And accordingly, if there are any such problems, one of the ways is to unload this employee. And so how can we do that? Well, either we give him less tasks, or we delegate some of his tasks to another person, or we perform the tasks instead. Now, we help them get their tasks done, but then the more important thing to do is just good time management and avoid getting into more complicated situations. You might want to ask, well, how do we manage time as managers? There are two ways. Either we set a deadline or we set a norm. The deadline is most often for tasks that are intellectual. That's, for example, some engineer who has to verify a new project, while the norm is for tasks that are physical. For example, a worker in a factory who needs to produce a certain item. For example, in the automotive industry, as I mentioned, the norm is, for example, producing 1,000 units of product in one day and in one shift, except that we've already reduced it by 15% in order for the worker to accomplish the task. If the manager doesn't know these things, and they just assume that their worker will always work at 100%, and perhaps they will at the beginning in the first week, the second week, 1 month, but then gradually the employee's productivity will start to decrease because they can't work to the maximum of their ability all the time. The deadlines, on the other hand, are about matching these things to the workload of the staff. That is, if we give someone who is overloaded with work a new task with too short of a deadline, we increase their stress. Here, on the other hand, if we give an employee who is not very busy with work a task with a very long deadline, they will still have a low productivity. So we have to consider these things when we manage stress, manage time. By deadline, I mean if these deadlines have been realistic. So It means that the manager must know in advance how much time will the task take to be completed realistically, or can the employee even complete it, given all other tasks that we have given them within this time frame. It's the same with setting a norm. Those are the two ways of time management. Like I said, in business, we can't separate time management and stress management. In order to have productivity, we have to have stress. The point is to get that stress in the right levels. Another thing a manager can do is to know the importance of a rest, because in Bulgaria, for example, this is unfortunately underestimated. I know this from other fellow managers and also from myself as a former manager in the automotive industry, that rest is one of the most important things you need to do for your employees. And it is basically a golden right in management because of a simple fact. A rested employee is much more productive than a tired employee. So it's no coincidence that people have been talking about a 4-day working week for a while now. In the countries I have worked outside of Bulgaria, like in Spain, for example, it was 4.5 days. That gives a better work-life balance while allowing the same pay instead of reducing the pay, because that would increase stress. And hence the break is what should be considered. Sometimes we have days off and we have taken the phone and the laptop home, and then the phone rings on Saturdays, it rings on Sundays, the emails keeping coming through, and then we end up with managers who worked on the weekend. When we talk about rest, the rule is that work should stay at work, rest is for rest.
Are you also referring to breaks during standard working hours?
Employers should not give tasks to their employees in the breaks from the standard working hours. In some cases, it happens that the person themselves shows the desire and initiative to work, and we leave this case aside. It is a private case. Not all people are like this. However, when the person has decided that they're going to rest and we call them and they may be on vacation somewhere at the seaside or in the mountains, however, they know that they have to pick up the phone, because if they don't pick it up, there will be a penalty of some sort. And there are such cases in business, unfortunately, maybe even too common.
That is to reiterate that time management is key to managing stress in the workplace.
It is indeed, and not just in the workplace, but in our personal lives as well. Like imagine planning a wedding and the time you need to set aside to organize an event like that. So yes, generally speaking, time management is key, especially in the workplace. It's key to talk about time management along with stress management.
By education and professional background, your interests are in the automotive industry. And as you have mentioned a couple of times, you actually have a very interesting study on workplace stress optimization in the automotive industry, published in the International Journal of Economics and Management Systems. Tell us more about it, please. What prompted you to start it?
One of the things that prompted me to do this research is that there's not a good understanding of stress levels in Bulgaria and how important it is to manage stress. People are overloaded with tasks, and therefore if we optimize their time management in the right way, it can reduce their stress levels. Also, along with time management, stress reduction methods can also be applied, and we might mention that later. One of the things that we found in this study is that if we combine such time management techniques with stress management and reduction, the results approach almost 100%, and specifically 95% to 100% productivity within 3 months.
Maybe that's what any employer would want from their employees?
Yeah. So for this purpose, every employer needs to understand time management and stress management.
It's very interesting because also in your study in conducting a pilot testing, you choose a total of 10 techniques to deal with stress at work. And there you have divided them into two categories of mandatory and optional. The mandatory include things like sports, exercise, healthy eating, water intake, quality sleep, which you mentioned a little bit earlier, reducing alcohol, coffee, and sugar, and something very interesting, less use of electronic devices. And in the other category, which is optional, there are things like keeping a journal, drawing, walking, time in nature, listening to music, talking to friends, and so on. And would you say that some of these techniques are more effective than others? And what is the effect of them in general?
In general, all of these techniques are effective. The question is how we use them. There is such a rule of reverse pattern. That is, if we have intellectual labor, we should unload with physical activities, or if we have physical labor, we should unload with intellectual activities. Here, when we grouped them, we were thinking differently. We were thinking of those things that affect a person through hormones, and even those things that affect them physiologically, i.e., things that unload them mentally. Sports, like, for example, is probably one of the first methods that I personally recommend, and I see many companies introducing it by buying sports or fitness cards for their employees. What does sport give us? It gives us concentration, a boost that is unloading, shutting everything else out, and especially oxytocin levels. That is happiness. The happiness hormone increases. Healthy lifestyles actually include things like reducing the use of alcohol, caffeine, sugar. What's the idea here? The body needs certain minerals, vitamins to function well, hence the need of water, enough water, which we need to provide to the body. Alcohol is just the opposite. It interferes because alcohol itself does not solve the problem. It just puts the person into a kind of stupor. And the problem here is if a person uses alcohol to escape stress, it will become systematic and it will evolve into alcoholism. Caffeine, on the other hand, for a person who is under stress, further increases their nervous excitability. They become more aggressive. Accordingly, it is better to avoid it. And sugar in general in the beginning will have a positive effect, knowing that people who have depression accordingly have cravings for sweet because sweet can activate the hormone oxytocin, the hormone of happiness. However, in the long term, this leads to diabetes or other problems because the person is constantly looking for sweets. They take sweets, eat them again in an hour, then again after another hour, and so on. And therefore, it is a detrimental routine. This is especially valid for periods of depression because it is very pronounced, and hence why we need to reduce these intakes to control blood sugar problems.
So these are still kind of ways to deal with stress, but they are not healthy for us because the body has learned to react to stress in this way.
These are not a way to deal with stress at all. These are a way to escape stress, especially alcohol. The person is not solving the stress problem. He or she is just saying, I'm going to escape this stress for a little while, whereas caffeine just increases nervous excitability. That is, if the person is under stress, it will be like pouring oil on a fire. Earlier, we also mentioned the need for a good night's sleep. 1 hour before sleep, electronic devices should not be used. Or, for example, if used, we should at least turn off the color blue. The blue light from smart devices suppresses the production of melatonin, a hormone that regulates sleep, making it harder for the brain to calm down and fall asleep. Many devices already have a blue color off option, but you don't have it. Electronic devices should be turned off at least 1 hour before sleep. And this is generally advice to all people, not just those who are stressed. If you want to have a good sleep, 1 hour before sleep is good to turn off the phone or tablet and do something else like reading a book.
Yeah, I've personally experienced that on my own because I've had that, yeah, that addictive scrolling, on some of the social media where you scroll endlessly and then you can't fall asleep.
That's right. And another related problem with social networks is the so-called information bomb. This is when new information comes in. And I have personally experienced, or it's it myself. I'm writing a dissertation. I've opened up a social network like this, minimized though, and I'm writing my dissertation. And I've got some term to check. And I open up Google, and at the same moment somebody writes to me, I reply back to them, and then after that I start wondering, but what was I supposed to Google? Zrenia, and I can't remember. And that's an aspect of the so-called information bomb. It's a constant bombardment of information to the brain. And actually the brain, in order to reproduce the new information, has to forget the old. And that's actually the fourth way to reduce stress: noise reduction. Whether it's information noise or real noise,
Oh, does that mean we're not just talking about sound, i.e., just audio and such?
both for sound and for information noise, was when the information comes constantly. And for physical noise, it is characteristic that it is felt, and that is why they call it the silent killer, because you cannot hear it. But because sound is basically vibration and the body feels it, and in the short term, there is no problem. 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 days, the person is exposed to higher levels of noise. But in a longer period of like a few months, then it becomes problematic. So, yeah, no, very often companies have offices with 10, 15, 20 employees at the same place. In my case, in the plant where I worked in the automotive industry, we had 50 people in one office, and a constant noise from someone from everywhere, someone speaking about something all the time.
50 people in one office? How did you even manage to get anything done?
Well, I can tell you how I did it. When I had an important task to do, I would go and get my laptop and go into a separate room and do my work there alone. In my case, that it wasn't 50 people in the same department, but we were all in one office and everybody was doing their tasks, discussing something, but it was this noise all the time. Somebody kept talking and something was happening, and at some point you start to wonder why your concentration is decreasing, because you hear somebody on the side discussing another problem, and that's one way to isolate the noise, the real noise. Like, you separate yourself in a separate room, or you put your headphones on, you switch off by putting on music. There are these scientific studies that show that, if we listen to music while we work, it increases our productivity, but we need to make sure the music is appropriate.
That's exactly what I was thinking as you were saying that. Would any music help with that goal, or
One that one likes. The point is not to listen with a high volume, but just enough to isolate everything else.
and just use it as a background of sorts?
Background, yes, but it's a pleasant background because the person is enjoying this music, the one they like, and there's evidence in most studies that shows that it increases productivity. It's kind of like the music is acting as an insulator to all this noise. These are the 4 ways that have physical meanings. The others are color therapy, aromatherapy, and laughter therapy. They are already beyond the physical ones. And the most effective of these 3, personally, I would say, is the laughter therapy.
What exactly do you mean?
Well, but we close ourselves in a room, we play laughter from the phone, and when a person hears someone laughing after a minute, they would also start laughing.
Literal laughter, you mean?
Literal laughter, yes. Baby laughter is the one used most often. You listen to a baby laugh, and within 2 minutes, everyone starts laughing. However, it has a cumulative effect in the sense you see the other person laughing, and then you start laughing yourself. Do that for half an hour, and you could even end up with a muscle fever. Of these three, laughter therapy is the most effective, and if practiced weekly, one can feel happy always. It does not matter how much stress there is.
I am very grateful that you shared this because it never even crossed my mind to try something like this.
Well, most people don't. I do that a lot myself. I play something that cheers me up, and for the rest of the day, I'm cheerful. I mean, it doesn't matter what's going on. I just think about what I laughed about all morning. One half an hour, I couldn't stop laughing, and it has a big effect. And the other activities, as I said, are the creative activities, writing in a diary or writing poems, drawing, neurography, one of the modern techniques. It's related again to drawing, art therapy, or for example, some hobby. The person does something in their spare time that relieves them. Then another stress relief technique is walking, and it works best to be in nature. I forgot to say something about color therapy, chromotherapy, which is based on colors that calm you down. Green and yellow, green from nature, blue from the sea, yellow from the sun, and avoiding colors like red, orange, black, colors that stress you out. And here is why nature, where there is greenery, or the sea on the beach, it leads to unloading and is an excellent way to reduce stress. This is also related to the next method, traveling. That is, let's say we are in Ruse, we go to the sea or we go to the mountains, but there is the difference between traveling and walking. A walk is often a short break, usually in a familiar environment. Traveling means that we are in a new place, i.e., the brain is engaged in exploring the new place. It is interested. It learns new things, sees new environments, cultures, sights, and emotions. When we discover a new place, the brain is stimulated to be curious and focus on the present moment, which reduces the focus on stress. The key, however, is to choose a place we don't know, a place we find interesting, where anything that is stressful can stay in the background until we return to our normal environment. Traveling gives us the opportunity to unload, and then when we return, we do not feel the same stress that was there before.
That's very interesting because everybody has a favorite place and they visit that place. And actually, your recommendation is when you go on vacation to be in a different place so that, as you said, to get the brain engaged, not with the stress, but with getting to know that new place.
In fact, but we can mention two options. One option is that we do not like this new place, and the second option is that we like this new place. If we don't like it, it won't be very good for our stress. That's why we have to research in advance the places we are going to, whether we would like them. And when we go to a place that we know, it's more like a walk because we've already explored that place. That's why the trip has to be to a new place so that we can unload while the brain is busy getting to know new places. In other words, one should switch off everything back that is left as a way of dealing with stress with the mindset that then when one returns to work, the stress will not increase. Other ways that are used are already much more widespread but perhaps less effective, like watching movies or talking to friends. Regardless of which of all these 10 ways we mentioned we will use, we should be aware that they may not have the same effect from one person to another. It depends on the levels of stress we are experiencing at work or in personal life, because after all, stress can be extremely high. And in this case already, if these 10 ways do not help, then consultation with a psychologist or psychiatrist is recommended. If there is no improvement, this is where I personally always recommend to people who have sought me out for counseling. If any or all of these ways don't work, then please go see a professional. And it's important to note that all of these things can be effective up to the point before the loss of sleep. Once sleep loss occurs, these methods will not work. I mean, that's why we said one of the ways to manage stress is, not coincidentally, getting enough sleep. And when sleep is gone,
That actually makes sense because then sleep is paradoxically the final wake up call from your body, which is trying to desperately let you know that you are not doing well. And so we rely on these techniques and other techniques until we feel that we have sleep problems. And after that point, it's time for a professional to step in and help us out. Is that right?
well, I'll get back to the survey. We rely on having management that understands time management and stress management, along with those techniques that reduce stress accordingly. Because if we don't understand time management and stress management, we're going to overwork people, and they're going to either leave overworked or they're going to be sick a lot of the time. Either of those two options. If we are an employer, we lose people, and therefore we lose production, and therefore we lose money.
To what extent are these techniques that we've talked about applicable during working hours and the actual workspaces, whether it's a small business or a large business?
It depends on the time available to the employees, respectively. In some cases, I've seen companies where on breaks, people walk or do exercise. For example, push-ups. Yeah, in some companies, they have stress reduction rooms where, for example, there are video games. You can watch movies, comedies, listen to music, and places that are landscaped to be able to get into the aroma in color therapy or phytotherapy, respectively, separate areas. Other ones are difficult to do during working hours, such as practicing a hobby or, for example, sleeping. On the other hand, a healthy lifestyle can easily be implemented in a work environment.
Well, thank you for the things you shared. One last thing I wanted to ask you, what are your personal approaches to dealing with stress at work or outside of work?
In the places I've worked, I have used all of these 10 ways to be able to reduce my stress levels. I don't use alcohol or caffeines, for example. I exercise and I eat healthy. So these are some of the easy methods for healthy living for me. I also try to sleep better. And one of the ways, as far as sleep is concerned, is to make a schedule, or rather a routine. For example, I go to bed at the same time. I get up at the same time. Sometimes I feel like I'm not getting enough sleep. I go on for an hour more, for example. But all of these ways, walking, traveling to other cities, like I said, all of these 10 ways, I've used them to be able to reduce stress when I needed to. And I can say they're effective. They are also interconnected.
While you were saying that, and I was thinking about the last thing you said about changing jobs, could that also be a de facto solution to the problem of stress in the workplace?
That's one solution to the problem, yes. If a person is constantly under stress and therefore stress levels are very high, one of the solutions from the person's point of view is to get a job that is less stressful. Even in many cases, they would prefer a lower paying job as long as they are not stressed all the time. But that's bad from a management perspective because you're wasting a person. That's why we say we have to manage stress. Unlike a lot of psychologists who think stress management is just about how to reduce stress, but it is also about increasing stress. We need to increase it to levels where an employee is most effective, but not up to the point where we make this person leave or end up in hospital because they're overwhelmed with stress.
Well, thank you, Doctor Markov, for sharing your insights on stress management to our listeners. We invite you to read Dr. Markov's research. You'll find the link for it in the description of this episode. And by the way, you're preparing a book.
Exactly, yes.
Can you say something about it as well?
The book is related to project management in the automotive industry, as before I went back to university, I was a project manager in one of the major automotive plants in Bulgaria, managing 16 Ford Motor Company projects, one BMW Munich project, and one Volkswagen project. There, everything that I have learned both inside and outside the plant about project management will be presented. Top to bottom, I think by the end of this year, at the latest, it will be ready as stress management time. Management is part of the same of this book, along with risk management, team management, conflict management, and these are called the basics of project management because to be a manager, you have to understand a lot of things on a lot of topics, and if you can, at the same time, help your team,
Do you know when this book is eventually expected to be ready?
well, at the moment it's 50% completed. Then the search for a publisher begins, and the goal is that the publisher is not Bulgarian. The book will be in English, and the market will be international as the automotive industry is not local. It is international. As for now, my idea is to be mainly electronic, not to have a hard copy, as we will have to think about printing, we will have to think about distribution, and things like that. At the moment, the idea is that, but who knows, maybe we change things and have some small amount of hard copies printed.
We are certainly looking forward to get our hands on it, so best of luck with your book, and thank you for being our guest today.
My pleasure indeed. Also, good luck with your project. It certainly looks good, and I hope more people get to appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Markov. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Please visit www.stressoutproject.eu to learn more about our initiative. Be sure to also download the StressOut mobile app to learn how to manage stress and burnout effectively. We look forward to seeing you in our next episode.